Listeners, who of you have not hived a swarm by this stage of the game in your bee career? Isn't that exhilarating? When that swarm is settling down and you realize you're about to get free bees, it's just one of the sweetest times in beekeeping. But what I want to talk about with you here for a while today is what do we do after the swarm? When life moves on and that swarm's in the box, it's going to need something, as is the parent colony. I'd like to talk about that for a while. I'm Jim Tew.
And I'm Jeff Ott from Beekeeping Today Podcast.
And we're coming to you on Honeybee Obscura, where we'd like to talk to you today on what to do, what to expect in the life of the hive after the swarm.
It's a great topic, Jim. I'm looking forward to this. I go back and forth. One moment I'm top of it, next minute I'm behind the ball. So let's get to it.
All right.
You are listening to Honeybee Obscura, brought to you by Growing Planet Media, the folks behind Beekeeping Today Podcast. Each week on Honeybee Obscura, hosts Kim Flodham and Jim Tew explore the complexities, the beauty, the fun, and the challenges of managing honeybees in today's world in an engaging and informative discussion meant for all beekeepers, long-timers, and those just starting their journey with bees. So sit back and enjoy the next several minutes as Kim and Jim explore all things honeybees.
Jeff, the thing is, I said that in the opening, the most satisfying time is just the moment you realize that swarm's going to be yours, that it looks good, it looks like it's going to stay. You know, that's just the stuff where you just rush all over town telling people who really don't care that I just got a swarm. I just got a big swarm. I just picked it up. So there's that. But right now, Jeff, in my case, swarming is gone probably 4 weeks ago. And in the case of my beekeeping friends in the southeastern U.S., they don't even remember swarming. It's been gone so long. So what happens, Jeff? What management procedures do we need to do to help the bees after they undergo this fission process where they split themselves?
You know, it's funny you should mention that, Jim, because your family and friends, they don't remember their swarm season. Yours is about 4 weeks past, and we're right in the middle of our swarm season here in the Pacific Northwest. So we are living that dream or nightmare. If it's your own swarm you see going up into the 50-foot tree and later leaving the county, it's it is difficult, and it brings up a whole sorts of management issues, as you mentioned, which for the parent colony and for the swarm. What was your question?
I was going to say, Jeff, you know what you're doing. You're getting all that swarm energy going because you're still experiencing that. I could see you doing that while I was watching you talk here. Yeah. He's picking up swarms. He's still excited. He's got bee swarm fever.
No.
That's not the topic, Jeff. The sweet pain of swarm biology. No, that's not the topic.
No, it's managing the depression of watching all the swarms leave.
Yeah. Well, you know this. You put that swarm in the box, and every book will tell you, and I tend to agree, that queen is about to be asked to do the last huge job of her career. So that old queen that packed up, lost weight, moved, went with the swarm, bivouacked, is now going to be expected to really build up a population, and most of the time, before she's run a cycle, 2 cycles of brood through about all she can put out, they're going to replace her.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we need to watch for is the odd potential that there is for that beautiful swarm to go queenless in just a few days, just a few weeks, or that aged queen not be able to get the job done. So that's where we come in.
That's true, Jim. As exciting as swarming is, it's perplexing too, because how do you manage that swarm afterwards?
You know, as you talk again, I have the urge to get involved in the swarm discussion.
Yeah. That's
not what we're talking about.
Right.
But I keep wanting to get involved in the swarm discussion because it's such a huge part of beekeeping, both in natural beekeeping and in management beekeeping that we try to do. That swarm goes, that old queen probably is not going to hold up. And people like me would tell the listeners, oh, you need to replace that queen. But here's here's the brutal truth, Jeff. The queen's going to be kind of pricey. She's not going to be the easiest bug to get. I know she's not a true bug entomologist, but you know what I mean. She's not going to be the easiest bug to get. So if it's working, why would you fix it? But the recommendation is consistently, you need to requeen that colony while you have things under control. Not later in the summer, not later in July or August in our case. I'm not sure when it would be in your case. You're so far away from me here. But when the bees do it, then there's not a guarantee. You don't have any control over the queen they choose, the stock they select, when they do it, middle of the flow, what? So the first thing we're saying to do is to monitor the activity of the queen in the swarm. You okay with that?
Yep, sounds good.
All right, are you okay with this? One of the second things that beekeepers can do is to monitor the activity of the new queen developing in the parent colony.
And that's the thing that's often overlooked, I believe. Because I think beekeepers will tend to say the bees will manage themselves and be able to get that queen going, and it's good for the varroa break also. So I'm just going to let the bees be bees, and I'll check on them in 21 days.
Yes. I agree with everything you just said. I probably am that person. Bees know what they're doing. Well, here's the reality of that. Not always, Jeff. I mean, a lot of time bees die in trees, hanging out in exposed locations where they've started nest building. They will start replacing a queen in the third week of September. You think you are really one dumb bunch of bees, but I don't know why they would do these things. But bees seem to have absolutely no fear of death. So what we're trying to do is to manipulate the bees and keep them as healthy and as productive as we can by us managing the queen, and that way the bees don't have any hand on it. So there's that dark period in that parent colony. And in my case, I'll open it up. I know this colony swarmed. I saw it leave, and I hived it. The swarm is right over here, so I know this colony has no queen. It's been 3 weeks ago. Shouldn't you have brood in here by now? So you look through what's left of that parent colony, and you don't see a queen. Well, Jeff, at that time, you kind of monitor the behavior of the bees. Are they flighty? Are they moaning? You know, the way the old master says the bees moan because they can't find the queen? Are they quiet? Because if you can't tell for sure that she's in there, are you going to rush off to your supplier and pay $25 or $30 or $35 for another queen? Try to introduce that queen with the queen inside the colony? What a mess you're making there.
The other challenge, and that's true. I mean, those are the questions that keep me awake at 3 o'clock in the morning when I'm thinking about my bees. And then the other thing that comes up is, well, in the meantime of the swarm having left the parent colony, the parent colony continues to bring in nectar and store it. And then you start seeing that the brood chamber gets honey bound.
Yes.
So not only do you not see eggs because they're starting to store honey in every little nook and cranny, there's no place for even any new old queen or new queen to start laying eggs because they're honey bound. So you have this after swarm parent colony, and you have the honey bound hive sitting there. What's a beekeeper to do? And that's a challenge.
Well, you're painting a real dark picture here.
Well, it's not. I don't mean it to be
What is a
dark.
beekeeper to do? And no, everything you're saying is right. Those things do happen. Jeff, this whole honey-bound thing is perplexing. It's hard to read, hard to understand, hard to expect. Let's take a short sponsor break while you and I think about it, get our thoughts lined up, come back and discuss it.
Looking forward to reaping the benefits of your hard work by harvesting honey? Sure you are, but getting the process started can be daunting. That's why Better Bee is here to help. And we've teamed up with our friends over at Bee Smart Designs to offer a beginner's extracting kit Especially for you, because you listen to this podcast, you'll get 30% off regular pricing, but only through August 30th, 2022. Go now and order your kit. It includes our 2-frame plastic extractor, the Bee Smart Designs on Capper combo, a plastic honey sieve, and a 5-gallon pail with a honey gate. So visit betterbee.com/begin to make extracting easy.
Okay, Jeff, we're talking about bees being honey-bound.
Mm-hmm.
And we have described that well enough, right? You're really having a beautiful nectar flow. Your colony swarmed just a week or two ago, and now they've really done a great job of bringing in so much nectar that even if you had a fertile queen, she'd have no place to lay. And you're saying that that's going to be a bad situation. Colony can't thrive, no place to lay.
It's a challenging spot to be in.
Yep, and I would agree with that. I have not had that happen often. What would we do if I did have that kind of a flow here in the Midwest? You got to do something.
Mm-hmm.
You see, this is not, we're keeping the bees kind of in an unnatural situation with all this space, all this genetics, all this extra feed, all this help that we're doing. So they're going to be a bigger colony than they would be in the wild.
Mm-hmm.
So we may have to step in and physically give them empty frames or give them frames of young brood that will entice them to build their own brood nest in the middle of all that bound up honey, and then give them space on top to put this nectar they're still bringing in, and then to possibly move that nectar up top if they had more room to put it. But you've got to get a population built up enough that they can go into the summer and then the subsequent fall and winter and past that winter.
You know, a few episodes ago, we talked about queen excluders, and I think that's one of those times when I take off the queen excluder, if I think that the colony is honey bound and the queen's having a hard time finding a place to lay, I do exactly what you suggest: is put some empty frames down below in the brood box, take off the queen excluder, and take off the queen excluder, and so that the bees can easily move up top, hopefully not the queen, and then she lays down below. They start storing freer to store the honey up top, and life is good again. Doesn't always work out, but that's one approach in that situation.
Life is good again? No, I would say life is as good as it gets. It may not be good again. Here's this. I've got a colony right now. If I stood up and looked out the window and opened the gate back to my yard, I could see it. It would not stop swarming.
Mm.
I picked up 2 nice swarms. I think there was a 3rd swarm that went at least, or maybe more. So this colony that started the spring season as one of my beautiful units is now literally swarmed itself into one of my lesser, smaller colonies. It missed all the nectar flow.
Yeah.
It didn't really bring anything in because it just could not stop swarming. So what game is afoot there with those bees genetically preparing themselves for surviving in the wild with these multiple swarms because they were not putting aside food sources? It's like I changed colonies because now I've got 2 nice swarms that have built up and are rock-solid colonies, but the parent colony is kind of depleted, run down, missed the season, and if you can say it, demoralized.
Yeah, and I know we're only in the middle of summer, but the prospects for the very good fall and next winter's not looking great for that colony at this point, and that's a difficult after swarm question that we all get into on time to time. With our colonies.
Well, I don't know why some colonies do it. It must just be genetics.
Do you requeen it? Do you introduce a new queen bloodline to that box?
I think better beekeepers than I would do that, but I probably wouldn't requeen it because there's going to be something else. There's going to be varroa. There's going to be a sublethal exposure to a pesticide somewhere. So there's always something. I probably wouldn't go right to requeening.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll bet you that in a perfect world, in a perfect beehive, the perfect beekeeper would requeen that hive. So the swarm thing, we need to say this right up front. All swarms are not successful. Even the ones that we hive, will not necessarily be successful. And if I left a point with the newer beekeepers, don't just rip into the hives that are working, to the successful hives, and keep taking their resources to bolster the needy hives, because then you're just going to have an apiary full of needy hives. So I kind of lean toward letting the hives that are thriving, leave them alone, and then work with the moderate hives and the weak hives to see if you can somehow get them out of either one of those categories. And those swarms sometimes enter those categories. They just don't build up.
Right.
I picked up swarms, and the queen just didn't make it. They requeened her almost immediately. So at the worst time that they could do it, they try to requeen themselves, and the colony doesn't recover from it.
Right.
It never builds up. So that's one of the times that beekeepers could help.
And we talk about, and there are different types of swarms and we're talking about swarms again, but when we're talking about post-swarm behavior management, we have to realize, as you said, not all swarms survive, and that brings up the topic, not all swarms are because the parent colony is a healthy swarm or a healthy colony. Sometimes they swarm because there's disease or stress, and those bees are already stressed when they swarm. So it's going to be natural that they have challenges in getting reestablished when you're sitting there with them in your box and trying to think that they're going to grow like the books say.
Yeah, and beekeepers say, should I feed them? Is there a pollen flow on right now? I don't know. Do you just give it your best guess? There's no nectar flow on. You ought to go ahead and feed them. Well, what you've just done, what I've just said, there's no nectar flow on. I'd suggest you feed them, so you're going to have a problem with robbing. So it depends on the season, and you just have to accept the fact that not all of these swarms are going to thrive. Some are, some aren't. Can I change the subject to a related issue? What if someone like Jim Tew told others, if you've got a colony that's going to swarm, if you see swarm cells there, split them out. Make splits before they fly away. I took my own advice, and I had a beautiful colony that was just chock-a-block full of swarm cells this past season, and I busted it down to 4 splits, including the parent colony. I got 3 out of the deal. There was one of those splits that just could never get its act together and get a queen produced, and so just yesterday I went through the process of combining that with one of the other splits that's okay, not beautiful, but okay. The other 2 are boomers. So I did stop the swarm, but in a way I had after split management, which is not totally unlike after swarm management. It's like an artificial swarm that I made. But it's the same issue. Some of these things don't make it. Some of them don't requeen themselves. I'd love to say the bees always know what they're doing, but time and time again, the bees make mistakes back here that cost them their existence.
And this has been a fascinating topic. What are the key takeaways for the listeners at this point?
I'll give one, then you give one.
All right.
I'm going to give the obvious one. The key takeaway to this is to monitor the queen during the dark periods while they are reestablishing themselves. Either the old queen developing a brood nest, or in the parent colony, the new queens coming up, mating, and beginning the brood nest too. The beekeepers can help in that regard.
I'll say the other is that not all swarms will survive. Not all parent colonies will survive.
I'm sorry to hear you take that, because that was going to be my second.
Well, it's a sad fact.
Monitor the queens and know that all colonies will not survive.
Yeah.
I would say that a takeaway is to build the colony up as much as you can within reason. You can feed both carbos and pollen, but you can just feed so much. I'm not a patient person, so I want to put on a gallon feeder and 2-pound pollen patty. Well, no, you got to bring them along more gently than that. So the third takeaway point that I could suggest is that you help as much as you can realizing at every step that that number 2, the one you chose, that all colonies won't survive, is a very real likelihood.
I think that's three good takeaways.
I wish the story had a happier ending than that, but that's enough of an ending, right?
Oh, I think it's I don't think it's a bad ending. I think it's a realistic ending, and that's part of beekeeping, and that's why we do it.
Well, I'm winning more than I'm losing this year, he said, just before he knocked on wood. Listeners, thanks for listening. There's no reason to do a podcast if you're not out there, so you don't have any idea how much we appreciate it. Jeff, thanks for sitting in today.
Thanks for inviting me along.
Always glad to have you here.